All right, so we're diving into whiskey today.
Sounds good to me.
We're going deep with cocktail party chemistry and their episode on, what was it, 161?
That's right, yeah.
Where they were looking at the chemistry of whiskey, going from the grain to the dram.
Oh, right.
And we're going to try to uncover the secrets behind what makes every sip so unique. So maybe we can start with, what are the major chemical players in a glass of whiskey?
Well, you got the alcohols, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
Congeners and wood extractive. Those are the three biggies.
Okay, I think I get the alcohol part.
Yeah.
But congeners and wood extractives, those are a little new to me. What are those all about?
Sure. So you can think of alcohols as kind of like the warmth that you feel, the kind of the kick, but the congeners are really where the personality of the whiskey comes from.
Okay.
And those are like the flavorful impurities that form during fermentation and distillation.
Okay. Interesting. So you're saying impurities are actually a good thing when it comes to whiskey?
Well, at least when it comes to flavor. Yeah. You know, they really contribute a lot to the aroma, the taste that we associate with different whiskeys.
So a little imperfection is what makes things interesting. I like that. What about those wood extractives? I'm guessing those come from the barrel.
Yeah. Those are the compounds that the whiskey picks up as it ages in the barrel.
Okay.
And those oak barrels are like treasure chests of flavor. So you've got tannins, which add color and structure, and then vanillin, which contributes to those kind of sweet notes that many whiskeys are known for.
Oh, so that's where that vanilla flavor comes from. I always wondered about that.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's actually added, but really it comes from the barrel.
Huh. And I'm guessing it's not just as simple as tossing whiskey in any old barrel, right?
Right. There's a lot more to it. So the type of oak, how the barrel's charred, even the climate where it's stored, all these things have an impact on the final flavor.
So there's a lot that goes into it even before we get to the actual distilling process.
Af-
So maybe we should talk about that now. What is it about distillation that makes whiskey, well, whiskey?
So distillation is more than just separating alcohol from the mash.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's about concentrating those all-important congeners that we were just talking about.
Okay. So the distiller is kind of like a conductor guiding the orchestra of flavors.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
All right.
Yeah, so during distillation, the distiller has to make careful choices about what parts of the liquid to keep and what to discard.
Okay.
You know, those cut points have a huge impact on the final character of the whiskey.
So it's a delicate balance, almost like a surgeon wielding a scalpel.
Precisely. You need a deep understanding of the chemical processes that are happening at each stage and a keen sense of how to achieve a certain flavor profile.
It sounds complicated.
It is, but that's what makes it so interesting.
All right, well, all this talk about chemistry is making me thirsty for a glass of wacky. But I'm curious, we hear so much about these different regional styles, Scotch, bourbon, rye. What creates those distinctions? Is it just about the grain they use?
It's definitely part of it. Yeah, the grain bill, the types of grains used in the mat, definitely lays the foundation for the flavor.
Okay.
So Scotch, for example, is primarily made with malted barley, while bourbon has to be at least 51% corn.
Okay, so that explains why bourbon tends to have that sweeter profile. What about aging? Does that differ between the different styles too?
Absolutely. Aging is where you see a lot of regional regulations and traditions coming into play.
Okay.
So for bourbon, it has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel, which gives it those kind of vanilla and caramel notes.
That makes sense. What about Scotch though? Because some Scotches have that very distinctive smoky flavor. What causes that?
Yeah, that smoky flavor comes from peat,
Okay.
which is decayed plant matter that's found in bogs.
Uh-huh.
And it's often used to dry the malted barley, which infuses the grain with those smoky phenols that we talked about earlier.
Ah, peat-smoked barley. That explains it.
Yeah.
I've always found that smoky flavor so intriguing, but now I know the science behind it.
It's really fascinating how geography and tradition can directly influence the chemical makeup of a whiskey.
Yeah, I never realized how complex all of this was. It really makes you look at a glass of whiskey in a whole new light.
It really does, and we've only just scratched the surface.
So what for you has been the most surprising thing that we've uncovered so far?
You know, honestly, for me, it's the whole idea of congeners.
Okay.
It's amazing how these impurities, they can have such a huge impact on the flavor and make each whiskey so distinct.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good reminder that sometimes the best things in life are a little messy and unpredictable, but we'll have to save that thought for later. For now, let's just take a moment to appreciate what we've learned so far. Who knew there was so much science behind a glass of whiskey?
Right. It's pretty amazing. It's funny, before I really dug into this stuff, I used to get so caught up in all the marketing hype page statements, fancy distillery names, single barrel versus blends. But now I realize it really all boils down to those basic chemical building blocks.
It all comes back to those building blocks of flavor, like you said earlier. And speaking of building blocks, I'm still really curious about those congeners. We talked about them a bit, but could we maybe dive a little deeper into those? What are the different types, and how do they actually create specific flavors in the whiskey?
Yeah, sure. So congeners, just to recap, are those organic compounds that are formed during fermentation and distillation, and they add that extra layer of complexity beyond just the alcohol itself. One of the important groups are esters, which often give you those fruity and floral notes that you might find.
Okay.
For example, isoamyl acetate is an ester that can create this sort of banana-like aroma, which is common in some bourbons.
Oh, so that's what I'm tasting when I get those subtle banana notes. I always thought it was just me.
No, not at all. Our senses are really good at picking up on these specific chemical compounds,
Interesting.
even if we don't consciously realize it. Another key group is phenols, which we talked about a little bit with the peat smoked scotch.
Right.
And phenols can contribute a whole range of flavors, from smoky and medicinal to spicy and even clove-like.
So does that mean the intensity of the smoky flavor, like in a scotch, would depend on the concentration of those phenols? Is there a way to actually measure how peaty a whiskey is?
There is. It's measured in parts per million of phenols, or ppm. So, a really heavily peated Islay Scotch might have a phenol level of 50 ppm or higher, while a lighter speyside Scotch might be closer to 5 or 10 ppm.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So if you see that ppm, it's a good indication of how smoky it's going to be.
It's like a secret code to decipher those whiskey flavors. So we've got esters, we've got phenols. Are there any other types of congeners that we should know about?
Yeah, there are actually quite a few, but a couple others that are worth mentioning are aldehydes and ketones. So aldehydes can contribute those nutty or grainy flavors, while ketones might give you those buttery or caramel notes. So it's the balance of all these different congeners along with those wood extractives that we were talking about from the barrel that really create that symphony of aromas and tastes that make each whiskey unique.
It's like a complex recipe, and even these tiny little adjustments can make a big difference in that final product.
Right, yeah.
It's not just about the ingredients, though, right? We also have to think about the techniques that are involved.
Exactly.
So we talked about distillation, how those cut points impact the flavor. What about the aging process itself? What's actually happening inside that barrel as the whiskey sits there for all those years?
Yeah, so it's not just about time, it's a really slow and gradual transformation happening inside that barrel.
So what's going on in there? I know we talked about wood extractors, but what other chemical processes are at play?
One of the important processes is oxidation. So as whiskey ages, oxygen slowly seeps into the barrel through the wood.
Okay.
And that oxygen interacts with the various compounds in the whiskey. So this oxidation process helps to mellow out some of those harsher flavors,
Okay.
creates smoother, more rounded notes,
Uh-huh.
and it also contributes to the development of those rich, nutty, and sometimes those kind of dried fruit-like flavors that you get with aged spirits.
Oxidation, huh? I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's kind of like how if you leave a bottle wide open for too long, it changes the flavor, but in this case, it's controlled and beneficial. Exactly. But there's a trade-off too, right? As whiskey ages and oxidizes, some of it evaporates through the wood of the barrel.
Right, the angel's share.
Yeah, exactly, the angel share. It's kind of romantic to think about those flavors escaping into the ether, but the distillers are losing some of their whiskey, right?
That's true, but it's an accepted part of the process, right?
It is, and in a way, that evaporation helps to concentrate the flavors in the remaining whiskey,
Okay.
making each sip even more intense.
So the angels are getting their cut, but they're also helping to create a more flavorful whiskey for us.
Exactly.
It's interesting. This whole process is so intricate. It makes me wonder if modern science is being used to, better understand and control these reactions.
Oh, absolutely. In recent years, scientists have been using really sophisticated analytical techniques like gas chromatography and mass spectrometry to actually study whiskey at a molecular level.
Wow.
So they can identify and quantify hundreds of different compounds that are present,
Oh,
which gives distillers incredible insight into how all these different factors, from grain variety to barrel char, impact the final flavor profile.
so they're basically cracking the code of whiskey flavor.
Yeah, kind of.
Are they actually using this knowledge to create new and innovative whiskeys?
Yeah, absolutely. Some distilleries are even using AI now to predict how different aging conditions will affect the final product. So they can simulate the aging process under all sorts of different parameters, temperature, humidity, barrel type, and adjust their techniques to try and create specific flavor profiles.
So it's a combination of the ancient traditions and cutting-edge science.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. There's this constant evolution, this continuous pursuit of understanding and refining those complex flavors.
This whole deep dive has given me such a new appreciation for what goes into making a glass of whiskey.
Yeah,
It's not just a drink. It's like this whole journey of transformation, a symphony of chemical reactions orchestrated by these skilled distillers.
I like that. A symphony of reactions. Yeah, it really is. And the journey isn't over yet.
Oh, what else is there?
There's one more fascinating aspect of whiskey production that we should explore, and that's finishing.
Finishing. Okay. I've heard the term before, but I'm not really sure what it means.
Yeah, so finishing is a technique where after the whiskey has been aged in its initial barrel, it's transferred to a different type of barrel for a secondary maturation period.
Okay.
And that's what adds that kind of final layer of complexity, a finishing touch to the flavor profile.
So finishing, huh? Like adding that final layer of complexity you were talking about. Can you give me an example of how that would work?
Yeah, sure. So imagine a bourbon that's been aging, let's say, for years in a new charred oak barrel,
Okay, yeah.
So it's developed all those classic vanilla, caramel, spice notes.
Right, right.
And then for the last few months, let's say 6 months or so, it's transferred to a barrel that previously held sherry.
Sherry, like the wine.
Exactly, yeah. So then the whiskey's going to absorb some of those flavors from the sherry cask.
Okay.
So you're adding notes of dried fruit, maybe some nuttiness, a hint of tobacco even.
Interesting. So you're not just like adding sweetness or spice. You're creating a whole new dimension of flavor.
Exactly, yeah.
What other kinds of barrels are used for finishing?
Oh, all sorts. I mean, distillers are getting really creative these days.
Hmm.
You'll find whiskeys finished in rum barrels, port barrels, Madeira barrels,
Wow.
even barrels that previously held peated scotch, which adds a touch of smoke.
So a bourbon that was finished in a peated Scotch barrel would have those smoky notes, even though it wasn't originally made with, peated barley.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of introduce some unexpected flavor combinations
Right.
and challenge those traditional notions of what a certain type of whiskey should taste like.
It's all about pushing the boundaries and exciting those taste buds.
Yeah.
But I imagine it must take a lot of skill to actually get it right.
Oh, definitely. You have to choose the right type of barrel, figure out the right finishing time.
Yeah.
You got to make sure that those new flavors are going to harmonize with the existing profile of the whiskey. It's a real balancing act.
So there's a lot of artistry involved in whiskey making.
For sure, it's not just about following a recipe. It's about really understanding those nuances of flavor and how to create something unique.
Well, this has been a real eye-opening deep dive for me.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gone from being just a casual whiskey drinker to someone who can actually appreciate, all the complexity behind it.
And that's the beauty of it, right? A knowledge really enriches our experiences and allows us to see the world in new ways. So next time you have a glass of whiskey, take a moment to really appreciate the aromas and flavors, knowing that you're tasting the culmination of all this, centuries of tradition, scientific understanding, and a touch of artistry.
Well said. Cheers to that.
Cheers.
And to all of our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of whiskey. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those glasses raised. Until next time, happy sipping.